I was walking up the street, and the police cruiser pulled up to the street where I was going to cross. So I just waited for the police cruiser to move, and he didn't move. And suddenly he got out of the car, and he walked over to me, and he said, Mr. Taylor, there's been an accident, and your son's been involved in it, and, well, they need you to come and identify his body.
When someone we love dies, we search their life and ours for memories. We do the same with anyone we've come to know. During the course of Seasons of Life, I've come to know many memorable people. Infants just starting out in life, children heading off to school, teenagers learning about themselves, young adults wanting to get established, people in middle age wondering about the time that's left, and older adults deciding what were the things that made their lives matter. Among all these people, none are more memorable to me than the ones you'll meet in this program: Dick and Dorothy Taylor and 4 generations of the family of Sarkis Ashoyan, all found meaning in the death of a loved one. What does it mean to lose a loved one in the prime of life? What does it mean to lose someone at the end of a long life? And in what ways do those who die live on in their families? This is a program about seasons and survivors. Dick and Dorothy Taylor lost their son Richard at the age of 30. They tell his story.
Our son was a college student and at Ohio University, and he was a member of the golf team for 4 years and was captain the last 2 years, and was a very strong, athletic young man, and was about 6'4".
Very handsome, and he had a marvelous personality. He had a very outgoing personality, and very respectful to us. He was our firstborn.
On a very bright January sunny afternoon, he was walking because his car had broken down, and he was walking back, and a young fellow, an impaired driver, ran off the road at about 4:15 in the afternoon and hit him and killed him.
It was several hours before police notified the Taylors. They had gone to an evening church meeting about 2 blocks from home. Dorothy left early. Dick was on his way home when a local policeman stopped him and told him his son was dead.
Suddenly I thought of his mother. I have to go home and tell his mother this. And that's no easy thing to do. It's one of the harder things that you'll ever do in your life.
Well, when he first came home, he just came in and said, "Oh my God, oh my God." And I didn't know. I thought whether he was having a heart attack or what was wrong. And I had just let our dog out. And we had lost one dog, by being hit in the road. And I thought that Nicky had been hit. And I said, is something, did something happen to Nicky? And he just shook his head. And then Rodney, our son that, there's 13 years between he and Richard. And he had gone on a skiing trip with his class. And I thought immediately then something had happened to Rodney. And I said, "Rodney?" And he said, "No." And Renee, and I said, "Richard?" And he said, "Yes." But he told me in a way that he said, they think that it's Richard. And so he said he had to go identify the body. And I said, "Well, I'm going too." But the first thing I wanted to do was run back to the meeting because I have friends there, and they're very good Christian friends. And so I wanted to go back there. And I don't know why. I guess it's just the place I knew to run.
Dick and Dorothy remember the days that followed.
You have many, many emotions. And I think it was probably about the second day, I got up that morning, and you look out the window, you hate. You hate everything and everybody.
John, I would go in my office and close the door and sit there all day and do nothing.
It's difficult to even make your mind work. You know, when this initially happens, you're so shocked. And maybe that's nature's way of allowing your body to come to terms with the traumatic experience, the shock that you have been given.
The funeral came quickly and was gone.
Okay, the funeral's over. Things are getting back to order. All the dishes have been taken back, that, you know, all the people that brought food. And so they think, okay, now you're ready to start functioning. Doesn't happen that way.
Dorothy Taylor is not alone. For most of us, it doesn't happen that way. We misunderstand the process of grief. Camille Wortman is professor of psychology. She has devoted her career to studying people like the Taylors, their sudden loss of a loved one, and how they cope as much as 7 years after the loss.
I think the main thing that I've learned is that a lot of the things that we think about grief as laypersons are really not valid, and I think lead us to relate to people who are grieving in ways that are not always helpful.
Professor Wortman has identified a major misunderstanding about grief.
That people are able to break down the attachment to the lost loved one, but what we find, if we look more carefully, both our own research and others, is that it's very common to stay attached to the person long after they're gone. So, for example, something like a third of the people, women who lose their husband after the first year, report that they sometimes forget that he's died. A majority of people will turn to their lost spouse for advice, will try to understand how he would have wanted them to react, will have imaginary conversations with him, will frequently think through how he would have dealt with a certain problem. Now, these are all kinds of attachment, and they're all perfectly normal.
Another misunderstanding is that after a year or two, people recover. They get back to business as usual.
I have to confess this, and very apologetically, we had some very good friends of ours who had lost a son about a year or two before that in an automobile accident. And they kept, this was on their mind constantly, and frankly, I got tired of hearing about it.
Professor Wortman.
In our study, we focused on people who had lost a spouse or child 4 to 7 years earlier in a motor vehicle accident, and the majority of people that we studied were having considerable difficulties. And we found that about 98% of the people we studied had thoughts on a daily basis about their loved one. The vast majority of people had painful memories that they were unable to shut out. The vast majority had been unable to make any sense of what had happened, had been unable to come up with any reason for this. The vast majority had had thoughts in the last month that this was unfair and that they had been cheated by it.
Does that mean the vast majority did not recover?
Well, I think it's safe to say that the vast majority did not come back to normal in the sense of being like they were before the loss. These are very different people with what I would consider permanent changes.
Misunderstanding the grieving process leads us to relate to people in ways that are not helpful. What's not helpful?
To provide a philosophical perspective on the event. So, in other words, to say things like, well, it was his time to die, or it was only a little baby you didn't know, and God must have had a reason for wanting that baby with him. People who are able to come up with some sort of meaning, some sort of philosophical perspective for why the loss happened seem to do better than those who don't. But meaning is something you have to come up with for yourself. You have to figure out on your own what role God's will played in the loss of your spouse or child.
Another unhelpful thing is to hurry people through their grief.
Isn't it time you got out? Isn't it time you considered dating or marrying somebody else? Or why aren't, isn't it time you got back to work? That would really be good for you. Now, in fact, it may be true that it would be good for them to be back to work, but like giving advice, encouraging recovery implies a judgment. It's like, you're not doing it quite quick enough. You ought to be doing it a little quicker. What's wrong with you? Get your act together. And that's very hard for people to hear.
And what's helpful?
Well, both in our research and in 5 or 6 other studies, a number of things have consistently been found to be helpful. One of these is contact with another person who's been through the same experience. And they find that they can share feelings that are very, very difficult to share with anyone else. They find that the other person really says, I know how you feel, and means it. Another thing that has been uniformly identified as helpful in the research is allowing the bereaved person to express their feelings of grief when they want to. And this is commented again and again where somebody will say, I could call so-and-so at any hour of the day or night and share my feelings, and they let me know that it was all right to do that.
Mostly, it helps simply to be there.
This is particularly important in the months and years following the loss when they're supposed to be over it.
There were at least two people who sent us a little something, either a little note or a card or something, all the time. And they would always put on there that they love us and that they're concerned about us. You expect to get all these sympathy cards, like you get 10,000 sympathy cards and you have to answer all those. You know how that is. But who sends you the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 10th, and 12th one? It's those unusual people.
In her research, Professor Wortman found the single most helpful element of recovery was some form of religious faith. The Taylors are Christians, and with the help of their family, their friends, and their faith, they eventually made progress.
For 3 weeks after Richard was killed, I couldn't pray. I was numb. In fact, I didn't even think about praying. All of these people were praying for us and about our situation, but here I am, and this has happened to me, and I can't even pray.
Then when you have a traumatic experience like this, and when life is disrupted, your faith is tested to the limit.
Dick came home from work, as I was starting to say, about 2 or 3 months after this, and we were really struggling, and he said, he took me out to the living room. We have a picture of Richard in the living room, and he said, Dorothy, if we don't hold on to the fact that we have eternal life, we're going to lose our minds. And that's how bad we were. And that helped me, I think, as much as anything. I can remember the first time that we laughed again after this happened. And you're so surprised to find yourself laughing because it's been so long. And it really feels good because then you begin to think, I can laugh again. Life is going to go on even though you think it isn't.
As in the families Professor Wortman studied, the Taylors found they were permanently changed.
So your lifestyle is altered. You begin to see the real values, I think, of life. You begin to change your opinions of every other person and every other creature that you come in contact with.
People have financial losses. They have a house burned down or, some traumatic experience like that. But after you have lost a child, you look at that and say, that is too bad, but everyone got out alive. Financial problems, what's money compared to a life?
The Taylors found a way to carry on their son's story.
The good that I feel has come out of Richard's death is that we are involved with Mothers Against Drunk Driving now, and every day I work with victims who have experienced the same thing, and I can be of help to them. I had one parent call one day, and he had witnessed his child being run over right in front of him. And he called me up and he told me, he said, I'm really having a hard time today. And I said, oh, I know, Juan. And he says, I know you do. Because he said, I know you know how I feel. And he says, it's so good to talk to someone that knows how I feel.
You know, they say he's dead. But actually, look at what we're doing.
And I feel that every day when I help someone, then that's something for Richard. And that's very important to me. That I guess I feel that he's living on in what I can do to help someone else.
Despite the passage of time and the discovery of meaning in a sudden death, pain continues and memories linger. There are markers everywhere, all the time.
The pain never goes away. It's always there. It's always in the back of your mind. Everything you do every day, it's been 3 years and 3 months, and it's still very difficult for us.
There was a hawk that Richard liked. And this hawk traveled that area. And so, of course, as I'd travel, every once in a while, I'd see that hawk sitting in a tree, you know.
Many would say that the life we come to know next, that of Sarkis Hashoyan, ended in season. For most of human history, death came in any season. Now, more and more, it comes at the end of a long life. Sark died in his 80s. No one knows for sure exactly how old he was. In contrast to young Richard Taylor, he left behind a wife, 2 children, 7 grandchildren, and 3 great-grandchildren. For this family of survivors, the experience of Sark's death was also painful and sad, but the legacy is different. His family talks about him. First, his daughter Joan.
As a very young girl, I remember he was always there with me, even though he worked all the time. Those evenings that he would come home would be the time that I could lay on the couch with him, you know, and be so young. I remember he'd always have me put his head to his stomach for some reason or other. I don't know, maybe because it was gurgled or something. But those are the things, silly things like that, that I remember. And my friends just loved him. And every time I'd ask him for the car, whenever I'd ask him for the car to drive my friends home, he'd always go, "What is this? Hocus pocus." And they'd laugh because that was about the extent of his vocabulary. He was a funny man. He was a funny man. He was strict, but he was a funny man.
His wife Anne.
He was the kind of a person that you don't cry over spilled milk. You had your depression. We went through it, laughing through it. We worked. He and I worked together for 30 years, side by side, and it's hard for a woman and a man and wife to work together. He had his department, I had my department.
What was your department?
Mine was, I was a boss. He had a good sense of humor.
He did.
We belonged to a senior citizen, and he loved it.
His son Ralph.
He wasn't didn't demonstrate his emotion that he didn't know hugging and kissing. I don't think I can remember we were talking about that.
He didn't
but
show
he told me
affection.
once that it's about time that his harsh way he was telling me it's about time you discovered I was worth something.
He was always such a fighter.
Yeah, he was just a tough guy.
His grandson Ralph Jr.
The wild man at the back of the store cleaning clothes. Gramps always had to do everything himself, but he was kind of neurotic and he had to get it done in like 5 nanoseconds. Otherwise, he sweated and freaked out.
He was an American. He was here in this country, and he was an American. But he really liked the grandkids. Oh, he was a good grandpa. My oldest daughter played backgammon with him all the time. They'd fight like cat and dog. And she'd say, "I'll let you win."
And she always used to say, "Gramps, you're cheating again."
And he was.
She got a chalk there so she could mark, "I don't trust you, you're
Yeah.
cheating again."
Yeah. When he retired, when he got so sick with his operation, it was then, do you remember, Mom, when he said that? He said it in an Armenian thing, and I asked him what it meant, and he said, "The worm turns." Remember that? And then, right from then on, he just had it in his head that he was dying.
Yeah, but he always talked about, things aren't right, I'm not feeling good. And he was kind of short with the fact that he was sore all the time, or he couldn't stand, or he couldn't walk, and he's kind of giving up the ghost.
Yeah, I think he just got tired because I remember talking to him to Thanksgiving before the Christmas he died. And I was, trying to come home to visit. And I got him on the phone, which he usually didn't talk on the phone. And that was the first time he sounded tired. I said, "Hey, Gramps, how you doing?" He says, "Oh, I'm not doing too good, honey."
Yeah.
I said, "Hang on to Christmas, I'm coming home." He says, "Good, I want to see you guys." And I missed him by a day.
Sark was tired and weak. He had lived a long life. He knew his death would come soon in the fullness of time.
But even towards the end, he was getting old, sicker and sicker, and he says, "Well, this is it. What's life going to be like?" We used to talk about death, he and I often, but he knew it, and he says, "What are you going to do? This is it. This is life. We got to go. We got to go." He didn't fear it. I don't think
No,
he
I don't
feared.
think he
I don't
feared it.
think he feared death. Because he
I
says,
think he was
"I've
prepared."
lived 80 years. How much more am I going to live?"
That's right.
Well, I was very lucky. 58 years with the man. I've had a good life with him. I think I have nothing to cry about. I miss him. Sure, I miss him. We had a good life. If I could go like Sark, I think I'd be very good.
Even so, the reality of death is hard on those who survive.
The day when he was dead, Jeff and I were standing in his coffin. And we looked down, and I said, Jeff and I were lamenting about, this is it. We, our own self, are feeling our own mortality.
Yeah.
Where you're 19 or 20, you drive 100 miles an hour on the sidewalk, you figure you're not going to die. So we're standing at the coffin, and Jeff was like, "Geez, is this all there is? You go through your whole life and you're in the box?" I said, "Turn around and look." And there was this room full of people. Kids, grandkids, the Danas and all Jeff's kids. And it was amazing to think, from even a genetic standpoint, how this one piece of a gene pool made it across the ocean.
Sark left a legacy of people, but equally important, he left a legacy of a story. This ordinary man who owned a cleaning store had an extraordinary past. As a young teenager, he fled his homeland in Armenia, fearing for his life. The country had been torn by internal war, and members of his family had been killed. Sark fled with several companions through hostile villages, across rivers, over mountains and deserts, and into Syria. Then a long, cramped boat trip to Canada, arriving finally in the United States. The story is one of strength and survival. It has served many purposes to Sark and to his family. They heard the story often.
We heard it all the time, don't we?
It's ongoing. Every time I was off base, as far as he was concerned, and the element of growing up. If I wasn't becoming mature rapidly enough, you just remind me, this is what you could have gone through, my son.
Yep. If you didn't eat your dinner, you had it
oh,
too,
yeah.
didn't you?
If I didn't work hard enough, or if I didn't get the bright grades, and I don't think he was berating me. He's just saying, you wouldn't have made it.
Eat because. You don't know what it's like to eat grass. How would you like to eat grass? It was a joke. I mean, oh, God, here we go again, another story. But it's the truth.
Hearing these object lesson stories as children, Rolf and Joan were sometimes resentful. But later in life, when they were adults, the stories took on new and deeper meaning.
In the back of my mind was, this is old country, this is an old man.
right.
I mean, what does he know? I mean, we're in the 20th century, and I. So that's how I was fighting it. But when I heard it the second time around through going to my son, it wasn't here it was told as an honest-to-God story, like you would around a campfire. And then it was, oh my gosh.
You were older.
And I was much wiser. I thought my dad got smart over the years, and essentially it was the same story, but I was listening a little clearer. So then it made a great impact on me.
The story was about surviving under severe circumstances. No food, no home, the threat of death. Did that make Sark a hero in his children's eyes? They don't talk about him as a hero, but rather as an example of how to be strong when life gets tough. And they want his story to survive for their grandchildren to know.
I want them to know where they came from. I think my dad was a great man.
I find myself thinking more about him when I'm driving to and from work. I don't know, he just pops up. There is a loss, and I couldn't articulate specifically what the loss is. I felt he, as I said before, there was an anchor. I always felt he was going to be there forever. Mm-hmm. And even though I never went to him for sage and wisdom and all that, I just could look at him and say that was enough. This guy survived that great attack from the outside world. I'm going to survive.
Before he died, Sark made a tape recording. The Hoshoyans will always know the sound of his voice.
One night we slept outside and I got sick. I got so bad that I couldn't walk. So these two guys holding me, and we were walking. And I told them, I said, leave me here and go. I said, because I have no chance. I can't walk. He said, no. If you leave over here, if somebody comes over here and asks questions, you might snitch on us, and then we all get cut.
Who's that?
Remember? Remember Grandpa showing you? Great-grandpa?
Dada, we call him Dada.
Who's that?
That was him. That was Grandpa. Great-grandpa.
That's who's that?
And that was Dana, age 4. Someday she'll hear the whole story and come to know the meaning of her great-grandfather's life. Every life, however long, however brief, leaves a legacy. Richard Taylor left a story that his parents want to complete. Sarkishoyan left a story that his children want to tell. Stories have a life of their own, and stories of those who have gone before help those of us who come after. I'm John Kotry. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the seasons of life.
So they grabbed me. Once in a while we sit down, and once in a while walking. Finally we got some place that they had a fountain, water coming out. They grabbed my head and they pushed it that water to shake me up. Sick. I must have caught pneumonia, you know. In the meantime, we see a flock of sheep coming over there. This one Turkish man says, Kurdish man says, we're going to catch one of these sheep and we milk them and give it to me, so maybe I feel better. By golly, that's how I felt better when they gave me that milk.
I've just heard him for the first time tonight, so it's kind of nice. It's nice just to hear his voice.